Moriam stared into the heart of that roaring flame and wondered, deep in his fractured soul, if his sword chi could even scratch such a monstrous attack. Doubt gnawed at him, but he planted his feet anyway, gripped his blade with trembling hands, and braced himself for the clash that would either save them or shatter them forever. But then, impossibly, unbelievably, the giant sphere of flames simply dissolved. It crumbled into nothing, scattered like whispers in a hurricane, leaving behind only drifting embers and stunned silence. Gulwen's jaw dropped. His mind went blank. He stared at the empty space where his attack had been, utterly incapable of processing what his own eyes were showing him. Moriam and Zushin stood frozen, their faces carved with disbelief, their hearts pounding against their ribs. Gulwen muttered to himself, his voice cracking with confusion, demanding to know what kind of trick these bastards were pulling. But confusion quickly curdled into rage. He sneered, raised his hand, and began molding another fireball, mocking them with venomous arrogance, declaring that their struggle was utterly pointless because he could summon these flames as many times as he pleased, like breathing, like blinking, like crushing insects. Except, before he could even finish his taunt, the flame in his palm erupted violently, detonating right in his grasp. Gulwen's eyes went wide, wider than they had ever gone, frozen in absolute shock. The explosion scorched the surrounding trees, charring bark and sending splinters flying like shrapnel. And standing among the smoke and cinders, wreathed in shadows and silence, was Yeo-Woon, demon's sword in hand, his presence alone bending the very air around him. Zushin and Moriam recognized him instantly, and a massive, shuddering sigh of relief escaped their lungs. Finally, they were safe. More importantly, Yeo-Woon was alive. He had arrived at the very edge of extinction, clad in his nano suit, a silhouette of absolute authority carved from darkness and steel. The moment Gulwen laid eyes on him, cold sweat erupted across his entire body, drenching him in primal terror. His instincts howled like wounded animals, screaming at him that this man was danger incarnate. His limbs shook uncontrollably, his breath caught in his throat, and he could not understand why such an ominous, suffocating presence was making his very soul shudder. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he had to run. No matter what, no matter how humiliating, no matter how fast. So he bolted, his legs pumping with desperate speed, fleeing in the opposite direction of Yeo-Woon. But something dark and hungry pursued him from behind, closing the distance with terrifying ease. Gulwen ground to a halt as a black line materialized directly in front of him, pulling the very wind into its grasp, warping the air like a miniature black hole. His mind spiraled into panic, screaming questions at the void. What was that black line? Why did it feel as if space itself was being torn apart? Before he could finish the thought, his body was cleanly split in half, severed by a force beyond comprehension. Yeo-Woon had just unleashed his brand new technique with the demon sword, slicing Gulwen into two perfect pieces. Zushin and Moriam stood frozen, utterly shattered by the display of absolute power. Moriam stammered, barely able to form words, asking if the cult leader had just literally cut through space itself. Yeo-Woon summoned his sword back into his body, looking almost surprised himself, remarking that he had honestly only intended to sever the man's limbs. But the technique had exceeded even his own expectations. Meanwhile, far to the northwest of the Cheongai Mountains, Wang Heil continued his desperate flight, carrying the broken form of the Blade God upon his shoulders. The Blade God, battered but unbroken, was slowly regenerating his ravaged body, pouring every ounce of concentration into healing. Wang Heil observed his master with anxious eyes and noted with relief that the bleeding had finally ceased. Judging by the steady regeneration of his torso, most of that devastating black energy had been expelled. But Wang Heil could not help but wonder, what kind of power could make even the Blade God struggle so desperately? And more importantly, Gulwen had been gone far too long. Over half a shurchen had passed, and still no sign of him. Far behind them, the distant flames of Gulwen flickered wildly before vanishing, replaced by the eerie emergence of that same black line. Sensing something deeply wrong, The blade god snapped his head around and ordered Wang Heil to stop. His face twisted into a volatile storm of rage and fear as he realized the horrifying truth. Yeo-Woon had attained an entirely new level of power. He uttered just one name, heavy with dread and fury: the demon god. High upon the mountain peak, the sun was sinking fast as Yeo-Woon's men worked tirelessly to haul the massive white tiger from the frozen lake. Their shouts echoed across the ice as they strained against the weight, urging each other to pull just a little harder. Sang-Hwa commanded them with fierce authority, while Hubong teased her, joking that she should be the one doing the heavy lifting since raw strength was her only real asset. She shot back with venom, daring him to test exactly how strong she really was. Nearby, other subordinates asked how many bodies remained, and another replied that there weren't many left. They had to cremate them all before sunset, so they pushed forward with grim determination. Standing at the edge of the frozen lake, Yeo-Woon spoke with his grandfather, who praised him for showing true honor as a martial artist. But Yeo-Woon clarified that his actions were not for the sake of his enemies, they were for the Eastern Frost God. His grandfather nodded in silent understanding. Yeo-Woon reflected inwardly, acknowledging that Arc-Wee-Wee had upheld righteousness in the Chongai Mountains his entire life. He could not allow this sacred ground to be defiled by the corpses of the Blade God's 6 martial clan. Gazing at the tombstone bearing Arc-Wee-Wee's name, Yeo-Woon admitted to himself that Arc-Wee-Wee was truly the greatest martial artist. In his final moments, he had surpassed both Yeo-Woon and the Blade God himself, without a core essence, without a nano machine, armed only with pure human spirit and an unbreakable fighting will. He was, without question, the true strongest under heaven of this era. His grandfather asked if he planned to return to the cult after the bodies were dealt with, to prepare for the coming campaign. Yeo-Woon replied that there was somewhere he needed to stop first. He had to examine the encrypted manuscript his grandfather had copied, which was undoubtedly written by the Blade God himself. That document should reveal exactly how the Blade God intended to alter the future. Even though he had escaped with catastrophic injuries, the Blade God was not the type to die easily. They had to uncover his ultimate objective if they wished to eliminate him for good. His grandfather agreed, noting that the location was on their way back anyway. Yeo-Woon nodded, deciding they would cremate the bodies and depart early tomorrow morning. But then, sharp screams ripped through the air from below. Yeo-Woon sensed immediately that something was terribly wrong near the corpse of the white tiger. One of his subordinates was violently blown away, skidding across the ice for several meters before barely stopping himself. Before he could catch his breath, he looked up to see an attacker already charging another strike at point-blank range. Hubong leaped in just in time to save him. The assailant was none other than Ho Sang-Hwa. Hubong demanded to know what was happening, but his voice faltered when he saw her eyes, transformed into a feral, crimson glow identical to that of the raging white tiger. Her strength had spiked dramatically, far beyond anything he had expected. Even if he were to lose to her in raw physical power, his internal energy should still give him the upper hand. Yet her cultivation had somehow expanded tremendously. She remained completely silent, snarling like a wild beast, radiating sinister black energy. With her hand locked tightly by Hubong, she reached behind her back to grab her axe, winding up for a massive blow. Hubong stammered, asking if she was seriously about to swing that weapon at him, before pushing the 6th elder out of harm's way. He infused his other hand with Rachi to block the incoming strike, gritting his teeth against the tremendous force. Even with his hand shielded, he could still feel the shattering impact radiating through his arm. It became painfully clear that Ho Sang-Hwa was not coming to her senses anytime soon. Realizing he had no other choice, Hubong unleashed his blazing fire power, declaring with grim resolve that he would subdue her first.